Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising, the only podcast that brings the real estate conference panel to your headphones. You'll hear from superstars from every realm of commercial real estate, the biggest brokers, the most well-known architects, the largest investors, and the most visionary developers. We'll learn what they do, how they do it, and what drives their success. We'll discuss the latest trends across regional markets, capital flows, both national and global, and we'll explore technology's role in shaping all of them. We'll take a clear-eyed look at where we've been, where we are now, and what's to come. Real conversations, real experts, real insights. This is The Real Market. Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising. Excited to have Todd Doney with me here today. Todd is a vice chairman at CBRE. He and I have known each other for too long that I want to mention because I still try to get along with millennials, but we've known each other a long time. And Todd, thanks for being on the podcast. Welcome to The Real Market.
Yeah, great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Well, we were talking pre-show, and I was telling you that one of the things I'm excited about this year is we've done a lot with prop tech people and really exciting technology, but I feel like the podcast has gotten a little bit away from the fundamentals about just what's happening in real estate, what's happening in certain markets, what's happening, especially in the office sector. So I'm excited to have you on because you've just been a leader in this business, especially on the landlord side, the mid-market kind of client. And you know, there's this drumbeat out there that somehow office space isn't going to be needed anymore, and that everyone's going to just work from anywhere, but not an office. And I don't happen to believe that, but just here we are 10 months into this pandemic. Do you believe the office is dead?
No, not at all. You've seen a million of these surveys, right? That went out when this COVID started and asking the employees if they are as productive at home as they were in the office. And not surprising, right? The employees all said they were, but was that because that's what they wanted their bosses to hear, or were they actually really as productive? I think it's the latter. I don't think they're as productive at home as they can be in the office. But the real heartbeat of a company comes from that collaboration, teamwork, the whole character of a company. You can't get that when everybody's working from home. So I think what everybody's sort of come to realize now is there are some really nice advantages of working from home. You don't have to fight through traffic to get to the office. You may not have to shave. You may have to put a suit on. You can have a little bit more free time during the day. Let's say if you want to do a workout in the middle of the day. So there's definitely some advantages. And I think employers realize that employees want that. And so I think they're going to accommodate employees more in the future. And so what the surveys say now basically are most employees want a balance. They like the ability to work from home, maybe a day or two a week. It's roughly 9% of employees surveyed said they'd like to work from home full time. So the office is definitely not dead. I think people are pining to get back to the office, especially those with, young kids or not a great setup at their homes, right? Would love that environment. So yeah.
I think everything you're saying makes sense. And I think it's going to be really the challenge to this next generation of leaders is how do you accommodate the marketplace of people demanding more flexibility, but at the same time having culture. And I think that gets lost a lot. I mean, I think people who are kind of pundits in all this are people who aren't part of teams. Like they write from anywhere and they're pontificating on what Apple's going to do or Box is going to do. And then we've had a few CEOs that have come out and said, you don't have to work from home. I just think the way people interact, I know that this is a great interaction for you and I, but it's not the same thing as having a meal or having a martini. And these things are stopgaps, I think. That's the way I look at it.
Agreed.
So when you're talking to your clients about immediate office use, like if a lease is coming due in 2 or 3 years, are you hearing that people want to get smaller or they want to get bigger? What do you think? What are people talking about still in the pandemic?
So what's interesting? I'm seeing a range of scenarios. So for example, and this is public now because I saw it in the the paper the other day, we renewed Disney in Burbank this year for 420,000 square feet. Same footprint that they had before in the Disney Channel building. They recently signed another extension for the same footprint they have in another one of our buildings in Burbank, and no change in terms of square footage. And in fact, the larger lease was a long-term commitment, and I think it'll go down as the largest lease in California this year.
Wow.
So that's one example. Another example is we just signed a renewal with O'Melveny and Myers, which is a firm well in downtown LA. They're in 400 South Hope, and they were occupying roughly 180,000 square feet before. They renewed for 111,000 feet, but with some very flexible terms that they could go back up to close to where they were, and they've got a couple years to decide. So I thought it was sort of an interesting quote that came from one of the senior people there, and that was a long-term renewal that they signed. But the quote was basically, don't let the opportunities of a disaster go unrealized. So basically, right, they realized that there was an opportunity for them to get a really good economic deal. And once we provided them with the flexibility to sort of contract and grow, so they don't need to make a decision today about what their space is going to look like or how much they're going to occupy. They just know they got a great real estate deal today, and they've got basically a couple of years to figure out, how much space they really need. They got a significant tenant improvement dollars, so they can sort of figure out if they're going to redo their space, which I think they will, how they're going to redo it. So I've seen both ranges so far.
Wow. Well, you've just mentioned two fairly big tenants, you Disney and O'Melveny, and I know there's a lot of people who listen to this who want to understand, how do you get to the point in your career as a broker to represent those kind of tenants? Why don't we take a second and just kind of go back and talk a little bit about your career and how did you get into brokerage, and when did you know brokerage was going to be the career as opposed to just a stepping stone? And why don't you let us know a little bit?
So I grew up in San Marino and went to San Marino High School. My dad was in the real estate business. He was selling mobile home parks. So as a junior in high school, I was pretty naive about colleges, really didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. I thought maybe I would go ahead and major in real estate. I was a fairly average student. So I did a little homework on schools that had real estate degrees, which were, at the end of the day, Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder, Arizona State, San Diego State all had real estate programs. So I applied to those three. I got into all three of those. And then I went to visit Arizona State with my father. And there was a lot of attractive parts of ASU as I toured it. I'm trying to be politically correct. And I said, hey, this looks like a pretty good place for me to go. Yep. And that was as cerebral as my decision was. and it turned out great. So I had a great 4 years there. I joined a fraternity. I was president of my fraternity house. And the whole plan was, when I graduated, was to go work with my dad doing mobile home parks. And his company was literally 4 people, including my older brother. And right at graduation, my older brother suggested that perhaps it'd be better if I went to work for a large company first. Otherwise, he said, you're just going to get your father's opinion of life, for your whole life. And that was actually some pretty good advice.
Yeah.
So I interviewed with a few firms, including Cushman & Wakefield in downtown LA. My across the street neighbor was working there. He was 9 years older than me, and he just happened to be getting busy, and he needed a young person. So I interviewed with Bob Ortiz, who you know well, and fortunately got that job. And then within a few years, Bob Ortiz recruited the person I work for, John Watson, and myself over to Cushman Realty to work with John Cushman, another person and company that you know very well. So that was how it all started. And literally, I remember my interview with Bob Ortiz. He's like, so what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. Well, what are my choices? and he said, well, you can do industrial real estate, or actually our most successful guy is an industrial broker. And I said, what's that again? He goes, it's warehouses and Vernon and Commerce and stuff. And I'm like, no, that doesn't sound great. And he said retail. I go, okay, what's retail again? He said, it could be a Nordstrom's or a yogurt store. I'm like, no. Because or commercial, right? We're in the downtown LA. He's like, these high-rise buildings around here. I'm like, yeah, no, that's exactly what I want to do. So it all worked out. It all worked out after that, but it was a good opportunity that I was given. Cushman Wakefield's a great firm to start with, a bunch of good people. Bob was terrific to me. My mentor, John Watson, was terrific. So it was a great way to get into the business.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think the way that you started in the business, and I want to hear a little bit about what your first month and first year was like, but do you think there's similarities to today, or has the business evolved so much that a young person today can't really make the same connection?
So, I mean, I think it has evolved to the point where I think you and I are similar in that we've got a lot of friends who have kids that are graduated from school that are interested in real estate who they ask you to talk to. And my kids have friends that want to get in real estate. And I never say no. I talk to these kids. I say yes to every single one of them, right? And I just think in the days that I got into real estate, the requirement to have some experience before that first interview in terms of an internship or summer jobs, you didn't really have to have that. And now, these kids that are trying to get into firms like ours, the resumes are amazing, right? And so I'm talking to these kids that are coming out of college, and they may have their license already. They may have worked for 2 or 3 real estate firms already for the previous 3 summers. They may have been working for one during the school year. They may have already gotten Argus certified, right? And so I think they're just coming a lot more qualified to the position. So, our summer internship at CB, we get somewhere close to 600, 700 applications before we actually have to turn it off. It's an online application process, and there's only something like 24 spots available. And the candidates that we have are amazing, and our program's really good. And so I do think it's more difficult these days to get in with the good firms. I also think the young people have seen some of the money that we've all been making for the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, and that looks very attractive to them. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to them, right, I'm saying, you're correct. There's some amazing opportunities in our industry. But like when that next recession happens, and you've seen it before, when the brokerage ranks get washed out, right? We'll see if they all have the same interest in getting into our business as they do now when things have been really good.
Yeah. What I find interesting is the tool skill set has increased so much because of software, and the ability to use Argus, which it's a supersized on steroids Excel spreadsheet is what Argus is. But like, we can't even hire someone if you don't have that skill set. It's not like the old days where if you were really good with the Thomas guide, you really had an advantage, and you could do things, but you could figure that out on your own, and you can't do that today. We'll talk a little bit about your first day or two on the job, and then I want to talk about what your day on the job is today. But like, when you first started at C&W, what was the experience in the first month or two, knowing nothing about real estate? What'd you do?
So when I was interviewing Cushman Wakefield, I did get this call from Bob Ortiz, who said, I've got 2 spots available. There's 80 people for it. I'm going to offer it to you and another guy. He asked me when I could start. I had to take a summer program at ASU to finish up. That I want to say finished on July 6th. I was thinking about maybe doing that summer Europe thing that a bunch of people do when they graduate from college. So I said, well, Mr. Ortiz, how about, let's see, July, August, how about September? That'd be a good time. He's like, no, if you want the job, you got to start July 9th, which was the following Monday. And what he had me doing was they had just taken on a listing out of Monterey Park, the LA Corporate Center, and there was a trailer there. And so I basically had to man this trailer by myself in the morning for 4 or 5 hours. And then John Eichler, who was the other guy that got hired with me that summer of '84, and he had to man the trailer in the afternoons. And so my first summer was half a day in Monterey Park and then half a day in the downtown office of Cushman Wakefield, and then canvassing, knocking on doors as much as you could, to sort of start drumming up some business.
I was fortunate to have Jim Travers, who's a classic on my podcast, and Jim is legendary for canvassing buildings. And I mean, we're using terms right now that are foreign to young people today, because after 9/11, you couldn't just walk in buildings, you couldn't just walk in. Nobody is receptive to a stranger walking into a business today. So in a world that is dominated by things like Zoom and our software and all, what is your view on the world? How do you get business today? Is it still the roots of what you were doing in 1984, 85, 86, or is it just radically different? And so these stories are fun to tell, but they're not relevant. What do you think?
um, well, I have to say, I'm fortunate, having been in the business as long as I have, that I have a really good network of relationships and a deep bench of clients. So I don't have to canvas like I did in those early days. But the fundamentals of, at the end of the day, we're all salesmen. And so the fundamentals of being a salesman still exist. And you may be using technology more than the knocking on doors. But I can tell you, our young people, and especially I've got a young person that joined me November pre-COVID, and those guys are struggling. It's really hard right now for them to develop business. You and I have known each other 30 years, right? Having a Zoom call is no problem for you and I. But if you try to have a young person trying to establish a relationship with a potential client over Zoom, it's so hard. And so you've got a bunch of young men and women in our industry right now who are trying to get their careers started. And first of all, they can't go interface like we're used to interfacing with a potential client. And the reality is, most of the potential clients really don't want to talk about real estate right now. They're still trying to figure out their business. They're working from home. Unless they have an upcoming lease expiring, they're putting off those calls and those meetings. And quite frankly, most people are just getting Zoom exhausted at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We have a corporate client. This story came through our workplace group, who has now formally announced within the company, you can't have more than 5 Zoom meetings a day. They just think people are just exhausted from it. So after your 5th, you've got to pick up a phone, or you got to text, or you got to email somebody. But they don't want people to have 10 calls a day anymore.
Well, I think there's a lot of fertile ground for young people today, because nobody's quite figured out. I don't think LinkedIn's the answer. I mean, I get so many outreaches via LinkedIn that I don't even look at, because come on, try a little harder. get my phone number, get my email address, do something. And so I think there's going to be some opportunity with all of this technology that's being so institutionalized for young people to figure out business. I was on a call earlier today with Mark Ganzi, who's the new CEO of Colony, and he raised $6 billion last year, all on Zoom. But it wasn't like this. They put together investor tours. They get the engineer with the GoPro, and they made it an event. And I was so impressed with hearing Mark talk about the world. And I'm not saying that every young person should be doing something like that, but they're going to come up with things, because there is a new interaction. And I think it's going to be, even when the world does reopen and the fear factor's gone, and we're interacting, there are going to be parts of this that we just stick with because it's easier. So, I'm anxious to hear how the brokerage firms do it. One thing I was excited to have you on, because we've been friends a long time, and I've admired you. And when I left brokerage, I mean, I don't know if I ever told you this, you were one of the reasons I said, I don't think this is right for me, because I always got so tied into whether this was a good deal or bad deal. And this, you were able to do it, but you had these friendships and these relationships with clients that were so much deeper than I felt I was going to be able to do as a salesperson. And I think that's a lot of what your success is, that people really trust you. You've had this ability to be friends and also articulate, what's as a counselor. Was that something you think you were just born with, or did you watch mentors who you said, oh, this is how they're getting business, I need to emulate them?
Yeah. Thank you by the way, that's a nice compliment. I would say probably one of the bigger influences in my life was the same guy you and I both worked for, and that was John Cushman.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought I worked hard before I started working for him, and then you saw the way that he worked, right? I mean, John was basically 24/7, and I think that instilled a lot of good practices for me in the business. And you do realize as a broker, right? You really only have sort of two things that you trade on, and that's your knowledge and your reputation. In our business, reputation's everything. And so I tried to be really, really smart and learn the business, kind of like John would have taught us, in all the different disciplines. Um, and then, you earn a lot of trust with your clients um, on assignments when perhaps some brokers would say, "Hey, that's a good enough deal. Let's get it closed." And in those couple of instances when you counsel your client, that you tell them, "You know what, I don't think we're there yet, right? I think there's a little more to get." They really appreciate that. And so when you start getting that reputation as having the interests of the client first and foremost, I think it just really helps your career, because word of mouth in our business is pretty significant. And when we do interview for business, you'll typically include a couple of references. And when those people call my references, I get some of the nice comments like you just mentioned. And so it's just a combination. Remember John saying too, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I thought there was a lot of truth to that as well. So it's just a combination. And then I remember Bob would always hate when I say that, I think there's a little luck involved in our business, right? Because I do know people that are smart, they work really hard, but just sometimes things didn't go their way, or the company they spent a ton of time with never transacted any significant business. And so I just feel really fortunate. I've worked really hard, and I've gotten lucky in certain times of my career, which has been really helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a humble thing to say, and I do agree that the history books sometimes don't recognize the luck piece for a lot of people. But I also think you put yourself in a position where people want to help you, and I think that's a little lost in some of this millennial ethos of dare all big dreams, I'd do it all myself. That having people who support you is very important. And I think one of the things I wanted to get into is you've gone from Cushman and Wakefield to Cushman Realty, and then you went to now I'm blanking on the name,
Insignia.
Insignia, Andrew Farkas, and then to CB. And all of these companies had different things that were appealing about it. And I just was curious how you would say the evolution of the business has gone, and then take it to why you think CB is such a great place for you.
So, the business has definitely evolved since I got into it, but um, the nuts and bolts have remained the same. So it's creating great results from your clients, and basically the transition from Cushman and Wakefield to Cushman Realty didn't even seem like one, because I just kept that same boss who just recruited me to his new place of business. And then my leap to Insignia was an opportunity that I was given by that company, who was trying to grow their offices here in the West. Financially, they made an attractive offer to me. And it wasn't because I had any displeasure with where I was working. I liked all those people. I liked John and Bob and everybody. And so it was not any dissatisfaction I had with the company. It was just a good opportunity. And then when CBRE bought Insignia, I actually spent some time. I didn't actually think I wanted to work at CBRE, so I was going to start my own company. And I actually cut a deal with Jim Thomas to start my own company. He had acquired City National, the old Arco Plaza project, and he was going to office my company within his space, give me that listing, share some third-party revenue. So we were actually starting to document that new company. And then CB again sort of made me another attractive offer to stay there. And it turned out to be a great decision. I think CBRE is a fantastic firm. I love our management. When I first got in the business, my perception of CB was just sort of this big, slow moving behemoth where guys just put their leasing signs in front of a property and waited sort of for the phone to ring. And I think it's evolved so much since then. I think a lot had to do with some of the acquisitions. So when they acquired Insignia, which was the Edward S. Gordon Company, basically out of New York. That group had a much more aggressive style of business that was so much different than sort of the California brokers mentality of business. And I just think that aggressiveness bled through the whole company and was transformative. I think it was fantastic. And then the acquisition of the Trammell Crow Company, again, another line of business that's been fantastic for us, that also came along with some fantastic executives. I mean, if you look at our senior leadership now, it's basically, Bob Solenik, Mike Lafitte, these guys are all legacy Trammell Crow people. So our company now, I think we're close to 90,000 employees or something, and led by a bunch of terrific people, really good management. They're giving us all the tools. They're spending a ton on technology. They continue to acquire companies and good people. So it's been a terrific move for me.
Well, I don't think the CBRE has gotten the credit it deserves for the fact that you digitized all of your workflow several years ago. So when the pandemic hit, it wasn't like people had to go in the office and take things off fax machines and do that. Your company was digitized and ready to handle a work from anywhere strategy. And I give Lou Horn credit. I give the senior leadership from Trammell Crow credit, but I also give credit to the more senior brokers who said, we're going to do this and we're going to do it this way, because it's allowed you to have great success over the last 10 months.
Well, I got to tell you, when I give Lou Horn all the credit, right? Because when he came up with this sort of free addressing concept, it's hard to believe it's probably been 7 years ago or so. And we started socializing it and then looking for space to build out. And I was going to lose my, 400 square foot corner office, and then have to sort of share space if I was out of town. And I think I might have even told Lou at one point, this is going to be a career-ending decision that he's making right here, right? This is going to be horrible. And he had all kinds of threats of people that were going to leave if we did it. And he pushed through and he did it. And it turned out to be fantastic. And our downtown LA office ended up being this amazing showcase. And the amount of visitors, clients, other real estate firms, lawyers, architects, furniture people that were coming through our space looking at that new model, it was fantastic for our business. Fantastic. And so that became the model that we rolled out across the nation. And actually, Lou is now studying, because a bunch of our offices in LA expire in the next few years. And Lou's already thinking about, hey, what's the future look like? And what are we going to do next time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The future of office. I was listening to a podcast with Tim Cook, and he said, the reason they did the spaceship was they wanted to meet every need a person would need, not just a place to work, but a place for spiritual, for meditation, for working out, a place for their kids to have daycare. And, because they firmly believe in this creative collision concept. And then you go to the other spectrum, BitHub and some of these others who say we'll never have an office again, but we will do quarterly retreats and we'll have these clubhouses. That's what Dropbox has said. We're turning our offices into clubhouses, not places where work gets done. So I don't think we're going to know, because we got to get out of this pandemic. But I do think that there's this recognition that office real estate has got to be more holistic. It can't just be a place where you work and that's it, because people work everywhere. What do you see? You've signed some big leases. You mentioned 2, and I don't know what we can talk about down in Inglewood, but if you could let us know a little bit about what you mentioned it earlier, but there are some big leases signed that you've been a part of. Were people going to pull the plug at the last second? What do you think?
So, yeah, in addition to, and on the Disney one, both the Disney deals in Burbank, I was on the landlord side of those. So I represented my good friend Jeff Worth and Blackstone. And then downtown, I represented GLL, which is the owners of 400 South Hope and PNC Bank. And then we did sign the lease at Hollywood Park with NFL Media this year. They ended up taking almost 300,000 square feet. And so they're working on their tenant improvements now in that building. And that's a beautiful new building. They'll move in next year sometime. I got a nice transaction with Wells Fargo Bank at 707, a renewal that we did. So yeah, it's been a good year. not a lot of new absorption, right? If you look at those transactions, for the most part, they're, other than the NFL, they're sort of renewal stuff. And if you look at, I represent Brookfield downtown, Wells Fargo Center, a couple and a half million square feet, and we've just spent a significant amount of money on the Halo, which is that sort of retail component, and it's beautiful. It turned out beautiful, and we're just anxious to be able to get people through there, right? But just touring velocity, as you know from your downtown product, is just, it's just slow right now, right? People are hesitant to go on tours.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the software that you use, and there's a group of people out there in the Twitterverse who want to see real estate, whether it's buying and selling homes or doing a lease deal, just become a click of a button, like you're on Robinhood or something. And you and I have gone through it. You remember the days of EOP when they did the simple lease and you can have this lease everywhere. There are a lot of reasons why real estate doesn't lend itself to that. One is the capital cost, the term of a lease. What do you think about? I mean, VTS is one thing, right? It's simplified our ability to talk with our brokers. I still have weekly calls on all of our 5 million square feet, but I love VTS. It's a wonderful thing. But what do you think? Do you think we're going to move the real estate business to the one touch of a Robinhood kind of mentality where, oh, I need at least 100,000 feet. I can just do it in a 5-second transaction?
I don't. I just think, especially for the larger transactions, I just think there are too many nuances to digitize it. I mean, can it happen in the smaller spec suite arena where maybe the tenant doesn't have a tremendous amount of leverage? I look at insurance policies that you and I buy, like our car insurance, and I'm looking at umbrella insurance, right? You never negotiate those insurance policies, right? Like your car guy tells State Farm just says, here's a policy, right? And I think to the extent there was small office spaces, it could get to a point where if somebody's in the market, there's enough transparency that they could see what rental rates are in a certain building, and they would just sign up for a $30 net 3-year spec suite deal. That could happen. I just think the larger deals, when you're negotiating some of the finer points of operating expenses and capital contributions and things like that, I think it's just too tough to put into a computer program.
Yeah, and there's a trust factor. I mean, I think the problem with Open Door and some of these others is just, the biggest investment a person typically makes in their life is in their home, and it gets a little scary when you're a button away and it's over, and oh my God, I can't get out of it. Who do I talk to? So I agree with you on that. One of the areas I wanted to get into is that you spend at least half, if not more than half of your life representing landlords in Southern California. There is, if you read the papers, this mass exodus. Oracle is picking up and leaving California. HP moves their headquarters. Are you seeing companies at this point literally fleeing California, or what's your view of it, and how do you look at California for business and for real estate?
So the answer is yes. I mean, I think that we have some amazing weather. We have a tremendous amount of talent in the state. The colleges and universities are putting out amazing young men and women, and companies realize that a lot of that talent would like to live in California. So there's a lot of great things about California, but I think people are starting to get fed up with the taxes. I think people are starting to get fed up with transportation and traffic. I think we've got a homeless population that's not getting addressed very well. And so when you layered on top of that, this COVID event, I think that was the final straw for a lot of people. So as you know, I have a home in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The market over the summer there was booming, right? I mean, there wasn't any housing inventory because people were moving from New York and California to places like Wyoming, Utah, Sun Valley, right? All those sort of places. So I think you are seeing companies leave. I don't think it's the death of California by any means, because our weather here is fantastic. There's no bugs, right? It's the ability to be in LA and drive 45 minutes and be at a beach, or an hour and a half and be in the desert, or an hour to Santa Barbara, an hour to Big Bear. That's it's an amazing environment. But we've got our challenges for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of a second generation Los Angelino where downtown was really important. What my father did, what I've done. In the state of California, so much of its history has been about opportunity. And one of the things I love about Los Angeles is nobody really asks where you're from. Nobody cares about, what your background is. It's just, can you get things done? But it's become inhospitable in ways that I think are very damaging. And as someone who has always kind of been moderate to the left, like myself, it's hard to sit here and look, and my wife and I look at it too, where else we want to live, what else we want to do. And I think this pendulum's got to swing back. You can't have a one-party rule super majority. It's got to swing back. And I think the way that it'll do it is business. So I kind of bring that. I don't like to get into politics too much here, but I kind of bring that back. As you're looking on your tenant rep side, as the companies that you're talking to, do you feel that there's a commandment to look at other options outside of California?
Yeah, I mean, for those companies that can, absolutely, absolutely. We've got a huge labor analytics group that basically our clients tap into to, if nothing else, make sure they've checked the box to see, if I were to move a significant part of my labor to another market, what does that do? What does that do from a cost basis? Our labor analytics group can also tell you, if you're looking in Tulsa, Phoenix, Reno, they can tell you, after some simple questions of the type of labor that you're going to be relocating there, how deep that market is for that labor, who you're going to compete against for that labor, and what that cost, that labor is going to look like. And so a lot of our clients who have people that they can relocate, they'll look at that and they'll see if that makes a difference. At the end of the day, sometimes they'll say, no, that's not enough money for me to move the needle for one reason or another. But other times they'll say, hey, Austin, Texas looks pretty good all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the scary things for the state has been HP didn't really move any people. They just moved their headquarters and where the tax base was. And, I've seen that with some other companies. So they're saying, hey, we still need to be in California to meet a certain need, but we're not going to have the central nerve system of the business there. And what I think people don't quite remember is, a lot of civic and charitable things are driven by companies that have their headquarters there. And if we're going to continue to lose, the Los Angeles in the 1970s, 80s, the First Interstate Bank, and you go through all the big companies, Arco and all that, they're gone. And then they're not people given to the charitable causes and all that stuff. And I think we forget that.
Huge, Chris, huge. You could create this list of downtown LA: Security Civic Bank, Arco, Pac Bell, LA Times, Unical, right? These guys were all huge supporters of the city, and it really hurts.
Yeah, it does. And so I think we got a lot to deal with, but kind of flipping back to CBRE and the things that you're working on. Here we are in January of 2021. You set your annual business plan and you kind of look at where the world's going. Give us your no one's ever going to be right on these predictions view, but what do you think is going to happen over 2021 as it relates to real estate in California?
So, and I'll be sort of LA specific probably in my comments, as opposed to sort of California in general, let's say. Our vacancy's been ticking up, right? Our fourth quarter numbers will come out shortly. You're going to see the vacancy again increased over the third quarter. Our sublease reports, right? We've been tracking sublease space since this pandemic started, and it's been a significant increase since the beginning of the year. The good news that people see is that it didn't really increase in December. So the good news is we might have topped out on that sort of component. I still think LA is a fairly healthy market. We have maybe 7 million square feet under construction, which isn't a lot on a 200 million square foot base. And a lot of that is pre-leased. So from the supply side, I don't get too concerned. I think the vacancy probably continues to tick up for another quarter or two. Our econometric advisors group has been doing a number of different scenarios, and sort of our baseline scenario is vacancy peaks sometime in the next quarter or two. But the models that we're running now are starting to take into consideration the work from home models, right? So the question everybody's asking is, when we sort of get back to business, how much of the workforce is going to work from home, and how does that affect demand and absorption? And so we're starting to run some scenarios at sort of 5 and 10% increase of a work from home population. And what that does is, at a sort of a 5% increase in work from home, it pushes out the peak vacancy dates further, sort of into 22. If you start to look at a 10% increase from work from home, it pushes that even further out and starts to really exacerbate the recovery of when you sort of get back to sort of peak rents. So
Well, I think you hit on something that is extraordinarily important for people to understand. When retail went from sales moving 5% online, you didn't see seismic shifts. When it went to 10%, that's when you saw retail physical stores greatly affected. So if in office we go to 10% of the workforce works for a company but does an office there, that's going to have a tremendous effect on our occupancy and our absorption.
Huge. Yeah, really very significant. I mean, I'm just in preparation for our call, I've been looking at, just a couple of our baseline graphs for vacancies and work from home models. We're also trying to, and again, our clients are just coming to us. Our clients right now are they're just pining for information, right? They want our opinion. And so we're running a lot of numbers. We're trying to do some comparisons against, how does this compare against sort of the 2008 financial crisis? How does this compare against the dot-com bubble? What was the time between sort of the peaks and valleys and get back to market rents? And so we're trying to look at cumulative rent declines, total changes in vacancy, and counsel our clients the best we can. I think we're heading the right direction in terms of the vaccine, right? I mean, I think if we can get that rolled out and people feel comfortable about getting back to the office, it's certainly going to be helpful. I mean, we got to get our restaurants open in California. I mean, that whole industry is just suffering so much. But I think we got like 6 tough weeks ahead of us here in Los Angeles, right? I mean, I have fairly decent insight to some of our hospitals here in LA, like a Cedars and a Huntington Hospital, and they're surging, right? They've got minimal capacity. You and I both live in Pasadena. I don't know if you get to Pasadena now every morning, but here in Pasadena, we could go a week or two with no fatalities, and then there'd be one. It was typically somebody in a nursing home, and I think we had 8 deaths yesterday. Only 3 were in nursing homes, and so that's just not a good sign. So I think we got to get through this spike right now.
I definitely agree with you on that, and I think I was talking to someone earlier. We've gone from I don't know anybody who has it to, well, I know people who had it and they got over it, it's no big deal, to now it's touching everybody. And I'm hearing these horror stories of, I took my father to 3 hospitals before we got him into a hospital, or my mother into this. So I think right now we are in a very scary period, and I hope that we can get the vaccine out. As you look at the business models out there, is there anything that you've seen in the last 9 months that make you think certain businesses are going to be dramatic in how they operate differently, or are people just using this technology still as a way to push through it, as opposed to, I mean, are we going to hear of Disney one day saying no one's ever coming in the office?
No, I don't think so. But I do, and I can't use names. I don't want to use names of my clients, but I do have clients who, for example, had 1,100 IT people in offices in LA who said, do I really need 1,100 people in the office for that IT function, right? That IT function is not a sales function. And so they've engaged our company on our workplace group to start studying who can work from home, how long will they work from home, what are the HR issues of that, what are the legal issues of that, and they're starting to sort of filter it. And I think they will. At the end of the day, I think some of those employees will be working from home a lot more, if not
Yeah.
full time.
So one thing about Los Angeles that's unique, and it explains part of our homeless problem, and is that it's a very supply constrained market. It's a very difficult place for people to build new product. And so from the office side, that's a good deterrent. But you look at what has happened within this infotainment and this the Netflix, the Hulus, and they have exploded. And the consistent beat I hear from them is we're a creative business. We need people around each other to be writers and to create shows and all that. They're not going away, but there's not much office space left in Burbank or Hollywood or West Hollywood. Do you see that, meaning that you're going to see